Imagine the Sabi Sand back in the early 2010s. It wasn't just a reserve, it was a kingdom, and that kingdom was ruled by pure fear. The kings? Well, they were the Mapagogos, a lion coalition so infamous, so incredibly brutal, they were basically the stuff of nightmares. In a world built on violence, they were the undisputed masters.
So you gotta ask yourself, how do you even challenge something like that? How do you stand up to an empire built on nothing but raw, terrifying force? I mean, it really seemed like an impossible task.
Well, the answer wasn't what you'd expect. It wasn't about being bigger or stronger, it was about being smarter. It was this calculated, incredibly methodical approach that would come to define one of the most amazing lion coalitions ever. They called it strategic patience.
Okay, so here's how we're gonna break down this incredible saga. First, we'll meet these Kingslayers. Then, we'll dig into their unique hunter's bloodline. This is so important. We'll watch them go through a brutal trial by fire, see them actually topple an empire, and then, sadly, lose their own kingdom. And to wrap it all up, we'll look at the one thing that truly lasts, their legacy.
So by 2011, the Mapogo dynasty was getting a little old, but their reputation alone was enough to keep the entire Sabi Sand on lockdown. It felt like no one could ever touch them. But way down in the south, quietly, a new group of challengers was starting to come into their own.
To really get who these challengers were, we have to go right back to the beginning. And their story doesn't start with some big, epic battle. Nope. It starts with a birth. 5 brothers, born into the Southern Pride sometime around late 2007.
And right away, you can see their makeup was pretty special. Their dads were the golf course males, sure, but they grew up in the Southern Pride. And that right there is the key detail, because the most important thing they ever learned, their core specialization, it didn't come from their fathers. It came from their mothers.
This was their secret weapon. You see, the lionesses of the Southern Pride were absolute legends for taking down African buffalo, one of the toughest, most dangerous animals out there, all by themselves. That incredible skill, that was the brothers' inheritance. And it would end up being the key to absolutely everything. So as they got older, like all young males, they were pushed out of their home pride and had to start a nomadic life. But because of those insane hunting skills, they were strong, they were well-fed, and they were confident. They started probing the edges of other lions' territories, looking for a kingdom of their own.
Then, in June of 2011, the 5 young brothers made a classic rookie mistake. They were full of confidence for sure, but they didn't have the experience to back it up. They wandered way too deep into the territory of the Majingalayans, another powerhouse coalition of 4 males that ran the eastern Sabi Sand.
And in a vicious clash, the battle-hardened Majingalons killed one of the brothers. In an instant, they went from 5 down to 4. It was a terrible, catastrophic loss, but it taught the survivors a lesson they would never, ever forget. Brute force alone just isn't enough. You have to have a strategy. Humbled by that loss, the 4 remaining brothers fell back and completely recalibrated. Lesson learned. Now, they turned their attention west, to the heart of the Sabi Sand, where the once unstoppable Mapogo Empire was now old, fractured, and looking very, very vulnerable.
And this is where they developed their signature move. Instead of just charging in for an all-out war, they used strategic patience. They would hang around the edges of the Mapogo territory, letting the local lionesses get used to their smell, used to their presence, essentially weakening the Mapagos' control from the inside out. It was brilliant.
And that patience finally paid off on March 16, 2012. They found the most notorious Mapogo of all, the legendary Mr. T, completely alone. And what happened next wasn't some messy brawl, it was a clinical, tactical execution. First, they isolated him, cutting off his escape. Then, they launched a coordinated flank attack, hitting his spine and back legs to immobilize him. And finally, they just wore him down. It was brutal, no doubt, but it was incredibly smart.
With the death of Mr. T, the Mapogo Empire just crumbled. It was over. The Selati brothers had done the impossible. They were the new kings of the western Sabi Sand, and their own 2-year reign had just begun.
For 2 years, from 2012 all the way to early 2014, the Selatis were on top of the world. They took over 2 major prides, the Otagwa and the Zimhungwe, and for the first time, they started siring their own cubs. Their bloodline was finally spreading, they had made it. But here's the thing, the very specialization that made them so successful hunting buffalo was also a massive risk. In late 2013, the coalition's leader, their most dominant member, Selati number 2, was badly injured by a buffalo during a hunt.
He never recovered. In October 2013, he died from his injuries. And that was the tipping point. The coalition had just lost its anchor, dropping them down to only 3 males. And in the lion world, rivals can always smell blood in the water.
And it's just so cool to see how they stacked up against these other legends. You had the sheer terror of the 6 Mapogos and the overwhelming numbers of the Majingalanes. The Selatis, though, they were never the biggest or the most brutal. It was their strategy that set them apart and carved out their unique place in history. And that new vulnerability, it didn't go unnoticed. In May 2014, the Majingalanes saw their chance and pushed west. They caught one of the 3 remaining Selatis, and after a brutal fight, he was killed too. The last 2 survivors were no match for 4. They had to flee. Just like that, the Selati kingdom in the west was gone.
But this wasn't the end of their story. Not at all. The 2 surviving brothers ran north, into the Manuleti Game Reserve. Their story of conquest was about to enter its final and maybe its most important chapter.
And against all odds, they did it again. In 2015, just the 2 of them took over a new pride, the Selati pride. They held on for 2 more years, but time catches up to everyone. In February 2017, one of the brothers died, leaving only one left. 2 months later, that last Selati male was seen one final time, and then he just vanished, gone without a trace.
So what did they actually leave behind? Not a physical kingdom, but something much more powerful, a bloodline. Before they disappeared, they had cubs with the Selati lionesses. And get this, years later, in 2021, a whole new pride formed called the Selati Breakaways. And its founding members? 2 lionesses who were the daughters of those last Selati males. Their genes, their story, it lives on.
And that really leaves us with one last thing to think about. The Selati reign itself. It was short, just 2 years in the West. But their genetic footprint, their bloodline, is still out there, shaping the future of that landscape today. It really makes you wonder, what truly defines a king? Is it how long you sit on the throne, or is it the power of the legacy you leave behind?